He replied that it was at the Yeonwi branch. Hearing the guy's words, the employee exclaimed in shock, unable to believe what he had said. His mind immediately went back to a conversation with his colleague who told him that this time, someone won the first prize for 115 games and all first prize. However, and his senior strictly commanded him whenever that customer will come, he has to treat him like a VIP guest. The employee's thoughts were interrupted by the voice of Ryu, asking him if he is okay, and the employee panickedly replied he is, and told Ryu to just wait for a minute. A few minutes later, a middle-aged man appeared in front of Ryu, who smiled and thanked him for waiting. After shaking hands with Ryu, he introduced himself as Guan Juno, saying that he was the president of the bank. Ryu simply replied that his name was Ryu. The president said that since he had won the first-place prize, he had to congratulate him personally. Ryu smilingly thanked the man for congratulating him. Afterwards, the man offered to escort him to the place where he could collect his winnings, telling him to follow him. As they approached the door with a sign that read, "Lottery Ticket Sales Team," the president announced that they had arrived at the place. As soon as they stepped inside, they were immediately greeted by one of the female employees who stood up and bowed to greet the president. Noticing some young man next to the president, she couldn't help but wonder who it could be. But she didn't have to speculate because the next moment, the president himself introduced the guy, saying that he was the first-place winner and that he had come to collect his prize. Then he told them to make sure that their guest felt comfortable. Surprised to see the guy who was talking casually with the president, the woman could hardly believe that in front of her was a man who had won first place for 115 games. Having recovered from her excitement and doubts, she told herself that she should calm down and do her best to satisfy the customer. After greeting him, she invited Ryu to sit down with a smile on her face. He did so, sitting comfortably on the chair right in front of her. She then asked him if he would like a drink, but Ryu simply replied that he would not, adding that he would like to get right down to business and take his prize. After hearing Ryu's answer, the employee didn't take any more time and asked him to provide her with the tickets so she could confirm that he was the winner. Ryu immediately handed her a stack of winning tickets that he had brought with him. Looking through the tickets, the woman couldn't believe that he had bet everything on one combination. It could only mean one thing. Either the guy had decided to risk everything, or he could see the future. Having finished with the confirmation, the employee said that everything was in order and that he could take the prize for the first place. However, Ryu's next question about how much he would receive made the girl freeze, as even just naming such numbers was absurd. After a second of silence, she replied in a trembling voice that his prize is 22.5 billion won, which is equal to $16 million. After he received his prize, everything went pretty quickly. The first thing he did was start looking for a place to move to. That same night, he opened a stocks account because he had information from the future. He knew that the price of Bitcoin would increase by 500% next month, so he also planned to invest his money in it. After returning home, Ryu showed his younger brother pictures of their new house and asked him if he liked it. Wani happily replied that it was amazing, adding that he had never seen such a huge and beautiful house in person. But Wani was confused about one thing. He asked Ryu why he signed a rental agreement when they had enough money to buy a house. Ryu replied that he didn't have any more money, as he had spent it all. His phrase made Wani freeze in place, and Ryu casually added that he had invested all the money into Bitcoin. When his younger brother heard this, he froze in place again, unable to understand how his brother could so easily say that he had invested $15 billion into Bitcoin. Ryu Min approached his younger brother, who had turned into a statue, and patted him on the shoulder, assuring him that he hadn't done it without thinking, and he knew the price of Bitcoin was going to rise. He told Wani not to worry. Then, hugging Wani, he added that not to worry, as he had seen a dream, and in that dream, he saw new numbers of lottery tickets, and they could always earn money through the lottery. After his older brother's words, the eyes of the naive Wani shone with admiration, believing everything Ryu said. Realizing this, he immediately grabbed Ryu by the shoulders and began to shake him excitedly, asking him never to forget them. Ryu somehow broke free from his little brother's grip, thinking to himself that he couldn't forget them, even if he wanted to, after repeating it countless times. Then Ryu turned to his brother and suggested that they eat outside before heading out. Wani asked in confusion where they were going, going, and Ryu replied with a smile on his face that they were moving to their new house today. At the same time, at some unknown location, Youngmin was punching and made a big hole in the wall, and then with a villainous smile. He said to himself that pumping all the points into strength was the right decision. Swinging his fist at the end wall again, he added to himself that he was even able to get a power rune that doubled his strength. As he continued to strike the wall, he started to laugh maniacally, saying that now with this powerful fist, no one will be able to stop him, and veins started to foam in his hand as he clenched his fist, ready to go another round of punching the wall. Then the scene shifted, and we see Youngmin now in front of Ryu's door, slamming the door and shouting Ryu's name. When he didn't get an answer, he said first he thought Ryu died in the first round, but later he found his name was not in the list of the dead people, and Ryu was even ignoring all his calls. Then Youngmin's face became furious, thinking the way Ryu glared at him before the angel kidnapped him. He can never forget them, and he will only get satisfaction when he will beat him to death with his own hands. Then Youngmin started to slam Ryu's door continuously, saying if he is hiding inside, he will now come inside after breaking the door. However, a voice stopped Youngmin, and it was an old man standing on the stairs who turned to him and asked him what he was doing at that door. Youngmin asked the old man if he should mind his own business, since Youngmin is not slamming the old man's door. Hearing this, the old man, adjusting his glasses, replied that he was indeed the owner of the house, startling Youngmin. Then he asked Youngmin again if he had come to meet a friend. For a second he froze, not knowing what to say. He quickly adjusted himself to the situation, smiled, and said that he had indeed come to see his friend. Then he asked the old man if he could open the door for him. Youngmin added that he had suddenly lost contact with his friend, and now he didn't know how to get in touch with him. Hearing this, the old man was shocked. Then he told Youngmin that it was now an empty apartment as the student who lived there had moved out. Hearing this, Youngmin immediately asked the owner of the house if he knew when and where the student had moved to. But the old man replied that he had moved today, but he didn't know where he had moved to. Hearing the old man's answer, Youngmin was furious, and he clenched his fists in anger, wondering how he could have left without telling anyone. Then the scene shifts, and we see the duo arriving at the huge glass building, which was the size of a skyscraper. Wani exclaimed in surprise and admiration. Covering his eyes with his hand to keep the sun from shining, he said with shining eyes and amazement that the building was very tall. He was so innocent that he was even surprised that the door at the entrance was revolving. He didn't stop being amazed even when the female employee simply handed them entrance cards while his older brother confirmed their identities. Wani continued to be surprised that there was even a security guard here. Pushing himself up in the elevator to his room, he turned to Ryu and said admiringly that this place was really amazing. Stepping out of the elevator, they headed to their room. When they got to their room, Wani exclaimed again in surprise, wondering how big it was. His brother replied with a nonchalant face that it was about 330 square meters. Such a figure shocked his younger brother, as their previous apartment was dozens of times smaller. Looking at the apartment, Wani, still in disbelief that they were going to live here, asked, "Isn't it too big just for the two of them?" Ryu replied that they have a lot of money and that they should enjoy their life. Then Wani asked Ryu how much the rent had cost him, and Ryu said that it had cost about 22 million won a month, which is about $17,000 a month. The rent alone made his younger brother's head spin. He thought to himself that not so long ago, he was still concerned about the price of meat, which at that time seemed very expensive to him, and now they are spending so much just for rent. Following his older brother, who was still looking at the apartment they would be living in, Wani asked him if they could have chosen something cheaper. Hearing this, Ryu shook his head negatively and replied that the more expensive the services were, the higher the security, which was their priority after all. On the first of every month, all players will fall unconscious as their souls will get transported to another world, leaving their real bodies unprotected, and it was the period that was the most vulnerable for all players. During this time, they became vulnerable to disasters such as fire or earthquakes. But the biggest danger was not the cataclysms, but the assassins hired by other players. And so, when the time came, players would need to prepare to have their bodies in as protected a place as possible. After finishing his thoughts, Ryu turned to his brother, who had already settled in a bit, and asked if he liked the house. Wani enthusiastically replied that it was beautiful, and it still felt like he was dreaming. Then Ryu kindly said he is glad Wani is happy and that he liked it. Suddenly, Wani's face became a little sad. He then apologized to his older brother in an uncertain and worried voice. Ryu looked at him in confusion, not understanding what he was apologizing for. Wani continued in an upset voice, saying that Ryu would be transferred to another world next month, and he'd have to fight for his life. Knowing this, how could Wani enjoy and be happy? But this sad atmosphere was broken by Ryu, who patted his brother on the shoulder, asking him why he was so sad. He added, "Do you think I won't be able to come back from the next round?" But Wani didn't say anything, and Ryu jokingly told him to stop thinking about nonsense and follow him. He had heard that the shopping hall on the second floor sells really delicious food, so they should go and enjoy. Wani agreed, still worried. Then suddenly a message arrived on Ryu's phone. After reading the message, he realized it was from Youngmin, and Ryu continued to ignore him. Putting his phone in his coat pocket, he thought of giving Youngmin a visit. The next day, a sleepy Ryu came out of the bedroom and was surprised to see Wani fully dressed, preparing to go somewhere. When he asked him where he was going, Wani happily replied that he had ordered some rice cakes and was going to pick them up. Still sleepy, Ryu didn't immediately realize what he was talking about. As far as he could remember, this had never happened before. Although regression did not guarantee that everything would happen exactly the same way as in the past, it was a significant change. Turning to his younger brother, who had already packed up and intended to go, Ryu asked him why he had decided to buy them, to which Wani replied that he was going to give them away to the neighbors as a gift to celebrate their moving in, as he thought it would be good manners. Ryu thoughtfully replied that being on good terms with the neighbors was a great idea. Pleased at his older brother's praise, Wani said that he could distribute them himself, adding that Ryu could stay here and rest. However, Ryu disagreed, replying that they should distribute the gifts together. He then told Wani to wait for a while he went to change his clothes. After a while, they rang the bell of the first apartment, from which a voice came out seconds later asking who it was. Wani, with a smile on his face and a cake in his hands, good-naturedly informed them that they were their neighbors who had just moved in and now came to greet them. Opening the door, a middle-aged woman with a smile also greeted them. Then, noticing that the two looked very similar, she asked if they were brothers, to which Wani smilingly replied that they were. Handing the woman a rice cake, he advised her to eat them while they were still warm. She happily received the cake and thanked the brothers. Then, after some more time, they continued to greet their neighbors, continuing to give them gifts, and after an hour they were almost done with greeting the neighbors and heading to the last place. This was the top floor, and the most expensive and the most secure one. While Wani was ringing the doorbell, Ryu was thinking to himself that there must have been someone from a rich family or a celebrity in such a place. Even after ringing the bell for a while, no one answered his call, causing him to have thoughts that perhaps no one was home. Pressing once more and getting no answer, he turned to his older brother, who was standing by the wall, and said a bit confusedly that it looked like no one was here. Turning around, they were about to head for the elevator, but the sound of the doors opening made them turn around. The person they saw in the next moment shocked Wani, while Ryu, although a little surprised, didn't change his face much. In front of them was a girl who had a beautiful appearance and was dressed in elegant clothes, who was looking at them with incomprehension. So, the video ends here. What do you think will happen next? Write in the comments and give a pink heart in the comments if you watched till here. Thank you.